All right, this is continuing factoring. Now, it's really important that you pay attention and listen to how you do this factoring. You might want to watch this video more than one time. We are going to be doing a lot of factoring, and it'll be easy once we do these kinds of factoring all on one worksheet. But then when we give you another worksheet where they're all mixed, then all of a sudden you really have to know what you're doing and be organized. So factoring by grouping is the type of factoring you're going to do when you have more than 3 terms. Notice this polynomial right here has got 4 terms. So some polynomials only have a GCF of 1, but rearranging the terms in the polynomial that have a common factor sometimes helps us to factor. And again, when you have 4 or more terms, we're going to factor by grouping. And when you group, you're really looking for a GCF in each group. Okay? So that's a big star. You're going to factor out a GCF from each group. All right, let me move that over. From each group. All right, so let's look and see how we set this up. The directions tell us to factor by grouping, but the directions aren't always going to tell you to factor by grouping. You have to know if there's more than 3 terms, actually if there's 4 or more terms that you are going to have to group. So I look here and I say, does each term have one thing in common besides 1? All 4 of them together do not have one thing in common other than 1. And so I have to group. There is no GCF. Sometimes though, sometimes there's a GCF in all 4 terms. You might want to see if you could pull that out first. It makes the factoring easier when you take a GCF out. All right, so I look at the first 2 terms and I say, oh, well, this one's got 3 x's and this one's got 2 x's, so I could take 2 x's out of each of that. I'm going to group the first 2, and then I'm going to take a look at the second 2 here, which happens to be my 4x and my negative 12. And yeah, I could take a 4 out of each of those. So I'm going to group the first 2 together. Always, always, always put a plus sign between, whether or not this is positive or negative, and I'm going to show you why in a few moments. Now I'm going to group 4x subtract 12 together. Folks, I'm going to be looking for this work in your homework, not only that, but on a test. Okay, so show me the grouping. Which 2 did you put together? Well, group 1 has an x squared in common. We already figured that out. So let's write some notes over here what we did. So my question here is, do they have something in common besides 1? No, they don't. So we're going to group 2 groups. Group 1 has x squared in common. Sorry about that, I should have left a space there. All right, group 1 has x squared in common. Group 2 has a 4 in common. And those are the GCFs of the individual groups. So I'm going to factor them out. So in this first group, I'm going to write x squared on the outside, right? Because factor means divide. I'm dividing out the x squared. X cubed divided by x squared is x. Negative 3x squared divided by x squared is negative 3. All right, so I took the GCF. Take GCF out of each group. All right, the GCF here was 4. It's positive 4, so plus 4 comes out. 4x divided by 4 is x. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. I'm not quite done though, because there's an addition here. Remember, when you are fully factored, you end up with a product of terms. You know, think about a factor tree. When you break it down to its prime factors, you end up with something times something else times something else times something else, all the prime factors. This is not a product. But these two groups do have something in common. They have an x minus 3 in common. Okay, so now we're looking at each term, meaning the x squared times the x minus 3 and the 4 times the x minus 3 have quantity x minus 3 in common. So you need to factor it out. Remember, it only comes out one time, x minus 3. Right? So when I divide this term by an x minus 3, what's left? X squared. And when I cover this up and I divide 4 times quantity x minus 3 by x minus 3, what's left? Plus 4. X squared plus 4 cannot be factored anymore, so this is my final answer when I factor by grouping. Okay, so again, if you have 4 or more terms, you're looking for 2 groups of 2 that have something in common so that you can take the GCF out of each thing in common. And if you're doing it correctly, the thing inside the parentheses should be the same. And you're going to factor that out one time, and you put in the parentheses what remains, the x squared plus 4. All right, let's take a look at example B. I do have 4 terms. I'm going to factor by grouping. You got to think. Do the first 2 and the second 2 have something in common? It usually is the first and the second, meaning the first pair and the second pair that you're going to group together. But not always. Keep that in mind. Not always. All right, so I look at x cubed and I look at x squared and I'm like, oh yeah, this got 3 x's to give up. This has a 6, but that doesn't. But that's okay, because this one's got 2 x's. So I could take an x squared out of the first group. And I can take it's looking like a negative 2 out of the second group. Now I'm going to tell you, to avoid trouble, always use a plus between your groups. Always use a plus between your groups. All right, so I'm going to group the first 2 because we already knew that the first 2 had an x squared in common. I'm going to want to see what you grouped, so don't just start going to the answer. I'm going to want to see that you're using a plus sign and shoving this negative on the inside. I'm going to tell you now that if you don't shove the negative in, you will forget to change the sign of this 12 if you don't do that. You are going to forget. So please just put a plus and shove the negative inside so that in your next step you can be successful. All right, GCF of the first group. GCF in the first group is x squared. GCF in the second group is negative 2. All right, so I'm going to write the x squared on the outside. Divide, right? I'm factoring it out. Divide x cubed divided by x squared is x. 6x squared divided by x squared is plus 6. Factor out a negative 2 out of both of those. So the minus 2 is going to come out. Negative 2x divided by negative 2 is positive x. Negative 12 divided by negative 2 is positive 6. Notice I'm not finished factoring yet because I don't have a product of terms. Like up here in the last example, I have an x minus 3 multiplied with an x squared plus 4. Those quantities. That's a product of terms. This is not. You're separated by subtraction, so you got to keep going. Notice that the first term and the second term, first and second terms have an x plus 6 in common. So you're going to factor it out. And you write it on the outside just one time. And now I'm going to divide this term and this term by quantity x plus 6. And what's left is x squared, subtract 2. It's actually what you have over here if you write this work down. X squared subtract 2 cannot be factored. I am fully factored at this step. Notice I have a quantity x plus 6 being multiplied with a quantity x squared minus 2. I have back-to-back parentheses. I am fully factored. Why don't you try example C on your own? Pause the video. Okay, hopefully you pause the video. We'll go through this together and see if you're correct. Notice I've got 4 terms, so I do have to group. The first 2 have x squared in common. Okay, so this is the first group. They have x squared in common. The second group has a negative 5 in common. All right, so I'm going to group the first 2, x cubed, subtract x squared. Remember, always put plus. Move the negative in. All right, we said the first group had x squared in common. Factor it out. You're left with an x subtract 1. Take out a negative 5 out of the second group. You're left with an x minus 1. Notice my 2 terms separated by this subtraction sign has an x minus 1 in common. It comes out 1 time, and what's left is x squared minus 5. And I'm finished factoring because this can no longer be factored. We were going to get into why something like this doesn't factor. I mean, look at it. They have nothing in common except 1, and the 1 is out there already. It's always out there. All right, so for your homework, I am going to require on the puzzle worksheets that you show me work. You should not just be matching. Okay, if you only match answers on puzzle worksheets, you will not get credit. What you should do, okay, if you only match answers on a puzzle worksheet, you're going to receive a 0. I'm not going to give you credit for that. Anybody can Google anything and look for the answer, and yeah, I'm not interested in that. So what I really want you to do is take a sheet of notebook paper, write the problems down, and show me the factoring that way. And then if you're interested in figuring out the puzzle to know if you're doing this correctly, then and only then. I'm not interested in the answer for the puzzle. Those puzzles are just there for you to have immediate feedback if you're doing this correctly or incorrectly. Okay? So again, I am not looking for the puzzle answer. That's not enough for me to say that you did this factoring. I'm not looking for the puzzle answer. I'm looking for the factoring. Okay? Show all factoring on lined paper. Folks, I'm not trying to be mean by making you do more writing. It's when we get into solving quadratic equations, you have to know how to factor. You are going to be sunk in the rest of Algebra 2, at least up until February or March, if you do not know how to factor. Factoring is so essential. I can't urge you strongly enough to really learn the factoring. It's got to be learned. You are not going to be able to do the rest of the things that we need to do in this course if you can't factor. So you must show all factoring on lined paper. factoring, learning it, is essential. And if you are having trouble with it, then you need to come to a Google Meet and ask for help. Okay, do not let this go. Please, please, please. Again, one last time. If you only match answers on a puzzle worksheet, I will give you a 0. I'm not looking for puzzle answer. I'm not. I want you to show all factoring on lined paper. Factoring and learning it is essential to be successful in the rest of Algebra 2. And one last thing, you need to write the original problem down. Write original problems. Not just the answers, okay? So I want you, on lined paper, I want you to write the original problems down. Give me the original problem and then show me how it factors. Because sometimes, unless it's factoring by grouping, sometimes the factoring is just one step. So I want to see the original problem, okay? Lined paper. Please make a note of it. Again, if you just give me the puzzle answer, it's got to be a 0. I'm sorry. Okay, hopefully you found that factor by grouping wasn't too painful. Again, if you have questions, you know what to do. There's Google Meet, there's in class, and there is the homework discussion. Have a great day.